Hey there. Welcome to part 4 of the Conatus surf forecasting course, Bathymetry, coastal contours, waves, and tides. Now we're going to be talking about why waves break the way that they break, where they break. This has everything to do with the sea floor. The study of the sea floor is bathymetry, measure of the deep. Don't worry, I will be emailing you or providing a link to a Google Doc to this PDF. So if you don't feel like you're getting everything as I read through some of these paragraphs on here, you will have this document or access to this document. There are going to be links. Now, again, bathymetry. Think of the Earth as all one big landmass, most of which is covered by water, some of which is above water. We can see the stuff that's above water, but we don't really see the stuff that's underwater. But as surfers, we really depend on what's underwater to determine how the waves that we surf break. Why? Because as we have already discussed, a wave is a circular orbit moving through the water. Just look at our image again. Here's our image. Imagine this is a circle moving in that direction, and that circle is under the water because it's the energy moving through the water, causing the water molecules to orbit. And so the wave, when the water gets shallow enough, is going to feel the bottom and topple over itself. Which means that the study of the seafloor and how the sea floor changes, so that's geomorphology, how the sea floor changes over time, how the earth changes over time, is very important for understanding waves. The bottom contours we as surfers really care about are submarine canyons, continental shelves, and near-shore topography. So river mouths, sandy beaches, coves, barrier islands, reefs, rock ledges, all kinds of variations and mixtures of those. And if it doesn't make sense why yet, that's okay. We're going to get to it. You can always pull up your Google Earth and switch to the satellite model. And here you will be able to see features of the sea floor, which is really cool. Awesome new technology. So for example, we have here the Hudson Submarine Canyon off the coast of New York. We're going to talk a little bit more about submarine canyons and what they are. It might just look like a small squiggle here, but that is a very deep trench. When we pan out, we can see the continental shelf on the eastern United States. So if we imagine that the waves created in the Atlantic, there's the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, are traveling through this open ocean, building energy, they're going to lose some of their energy when they hit this shallower shelf. But a feature such as the Hudson Canyon, as the waves are traveling over this deeper area, they're going to feel like they are, the part that goes over the canyon is going to feel like it's in deeper water, which is going to cause the wave to refract or bend. So this canyon and its location just off of New York and New Jersey actually has the ability to amplify swell as it enters into our waters. Not all of the time necessarily, but it does have the ability to do that. Let's look at a few other submarine canyons just while we're on the map. A very famous one is off the coast of Portugal, the Nazaré Canyon, and you'll start to see it. Look around Lisbon here. Yikes. Okay. You see this, that one, and there's another submarine canyon south of Lisbon. That's not the one that we're talking about. But we can start to see the Nazaré Canyon right here. There's Nazaré right there. Just zoom in a little more. There you see it. Nazaré right there, and the canyon is here. So what that does is when the swells are coming in over the Atlantic, this super deep trench amplifies them and shoots them right at Nazaré. Look at one more so we get the concept. We'll go into this one a little bit more in depth because it helps you learn something about me as well. I am from a little town called Moss Landing that has at its beach the mouth of one of the world's largest submarine canyons. Can you start to see it? By now you should be able to recognize what these canyons look like. There it is. This is the Monterey Bay. I actually grew up in Prunedale. And, well, I grew up in a boat in a harbor in Moss Landing, then I moved to Prunedale when I was younger. I went to Castroville Elementary School. Here's the Monterey Bay Submarine Canyon. It's huge, and unlike the other canyons, it's very near shore. So Moss Landing is a surf break where I grew up here. There's Santa Cruz and the point breaks of Santa Cruz. And the Monterey Bay is a great example of the stuff that we're going through in this lecture. There's a lot of curvature in the coast of Northern California, much more curvature than we see on the East Coast. For example, Santa Cruz is completely south facing, where Moss Landing is west facing, and this part of Monterey is completely north facing. This has a lot of implications for local winds. So, for example, if the wind is coming from the south and you're standing here in Monterey, you're going to feel that wind on your back. If the wind is coming from the south and you're standing here in Santa Cruz, you're going to feel that wind on your face. If the wind is coming from the south and you're standing in Moss Landing, you're going to feel that wind on your cheek. We'll talk about this more in the lecture on local winds. Just to say, similar for swell direction. If a swell is coming from the south, nothing in the middle of the Monterey Bay is going to receive that swell. Even the canyon will not bend the swell enough to send it to the beach breaks in the middle of the Monterey Bay. Another thing that is important is that this is all sand here. So from here to here is all sand. It's all beach. But then you get rocky points here and rocky reef breaks in Pacific Grove. And Santa Cruz has rock reef breaks, rock point breaks. Why point breaks? We'll talk more about what a point break is, but the general point that I want to make here is that as the swells travel, feeling the bottom contours, even a south swell is not going to be amplified into this area of the Monterey Bay by the canyon, but it will be amplified into Santa Cruz. So Santa Cruz is a great place to surf for south swells, because it is going to get amplification from the canyon. Okay, so submarine canyons are very, very important for amplifying swell because they are deep. So again, the general principle is that as the waves travel, in this case, over through the Pacific Ocean, a swell coming from this direction would be a south swell, a swell coming from this direction would be a west swell, a swell coming from this direction would be a northwest swell. All of this, you can tell, is deeper. And the other thing that we notice, let's pull out, is that the continental shelf is pretty much just ended at the coast. It doesn't have that edge that goes way out there like it does on the East Coast. So the swells are traveling through deep water, and it's going to feel like they're still in open ocean when they're in the middle of the Monterey Bay because the water is so deep. Take another look. And this is just incredible.
Beneath the beautiful blue waters of Monterey Bay lies a
We don't need to listen to her. We'll just look at but you'll have the link to this in the PDF so you can watch it for yourself. This is Mabari. This is right off of Moss Landing. And they're going to have a really cool graphic here of what this canyon looks like. So here they're draining out the water. And of course, the flora and fauna are going to be completely different than above land. And they have this little submersible that makes these images of the seafloor. Watch this on your own. It's just 1 minute long. Really cool little video. Some of the creatures under there. And here again is an image of the canyon. So incredibly deep water. Incredibly deep. Now, as waves travel over the ocean floor, they're going to diffract and refract. So diffraction is when a wave spreads out. I have, if we look down here, let's see. Definitions down here, straight from the classic Waves and Beaches. I'll link to this book is right here. Just go buy the book. You'll want it. Refraction is just bending. So we're going to look at this more when we look at actual waves. And when I discuss what a sandbar is, what a point break is, what a river mouth is, so the different kinds of waves that we surf. Diffraction, quote from Waves and Beaches, when waves spread out their energy as they pass around the edge of an obstacle or through any opening. We can imagine it like a fanning. So as the waves pass by an island, for example, they're going to diffract out. They're not going to lose all their energy. And we can see the relationship between refraction and diffraction. And if you really want to get into the nitty-gritty physics of it, you can click this link and check out the physics. All waves work this way. Light waves work this way. Ocean waves work this way. So waves bend, and that's really important. It's also important to remember this when we're thinking about all of the variability of ocean waves that we surf. All the ways that they can hop to one side, for example, or be slightly unpredictable. They do emanate out from these moving storms, which themselves are unpredictable, and we can in our heads imagine like a radar pulse of swell coming out from a storm, but it's going to make more sense if you think of those radar pulses as gaining bends in them as they go out in different directions. So swells are not perfect. Here are the links on submarine canyons. Here's the link to the Monterey Bay Canyon. And here's a link to a NOAA page explaining submarine canyons. Now we're going to get into how waves interact with the near shore and the different kinds of waves that we surf. Point breaks, first of all, headlands, reefs, importance of direction that these face, especially for ideal conditions vis-a-vis local winds and swell direction. So what do I mean by that? We already looked at Santa Cruz and talked about south wind and how it faces. We're going to look at an image from another famous point break, this time in New Zealand, called Raglan Bay. Okay, so this is a left-hand point break. All the waves, if you're going to paddle into them, we'll talk more about rights and lefts in a little bit. You're going to look to your left and stand up and go to the left. Doesn't matter which foot is forward, but you can't go right. If you go right, what happens? You hit rocks. So these swell bands are coming in to this point break. We call it a point break because the land sticks out in a point like this. And what happens is the point of land refracts the swell. we see refraction and diffraction in this one image. So as the swell is wrapping around, the wave is breaking in the shallow water and staying open in the deeper water. This green part of the wave, the shoulder or face of the wave, versus the whitewater part of the wave, is the part that we surf, and it's staying open because the water is deeper, further away from the land. And because the land is curved like that, it bends the swell. It refracts the swell, and you can see right here in the image that it is diffracting the swell into the bay. So it's spreading the swell bands out into the bay. So we see both of those at work in this one image. When we're looking at a map of any sort, so let's go back to our Google Maps. And for these purposes, let's come over to the east coast of the United States. And I want to show an image of a point break that we have here. Believe it or not, see this Point Judith right here. This is all rock, and because it's a point, what happens is when the swell bands come into Point Judith, let's say from any of these directions, and you can see the rock reef under the water here. Awesome Google Maps. This point of land bends the swells, and they break alongside it. So on this side you have right breaking waves. On this side you have left breaking waves. There are different reef formations and different beaches on this edge. The other thing for local winds, like I said, if you're standing here facing northeast, a northeast wind is going to come right in your face. Where if you're standing on this piece of land, you're going to feel it at your back, and just vice versa. For swell direction and swell windows, it's going to be ideal for the swell to be coming in something of this southeast direction rather than straight easterly, although that will get in. Southerly works well. Believe it or not, despite all of these islands kind of blocking it, it receives quite a bit of swell because if you look, it's quite open to the dominant window in the Atlantic from which to receive swell. Whereas we don't have that kind of curvature where I live here in Rockaway Beach. We do notice that Rockaway Beach is facing a different direction than Long Beach, but this is all sand. But the sand is important because under the sand makes sandbars. And a sandbar, just gonna go here. Sandbar is at beach breaks. Beach breaks can have human interference and they can be without human interference. A beach break with human interference has a jetty. Here in Rockaway Beach, we have jetties. But there are some stretches of beach that are bigger that don't have jetties. So it's possible to surf farther away or closer to jetties, as the case may be. Go down here to, this is not in alphabetical order. Sandbar. Sandbar, right here. Here we go. Sand that has settled at a beach break with a variation of shallowness and depth that causes waves to refract in such a way that they peel. This is, at least when they peel, it's a good sandbar. A bad sandbar has less variation in shallowness and depth, and the waves that break on it are usually closeouts. We're going to go through all of those terms with visual images just in a second here. But that's important. When we're talking about sandbars or good sandbars, we mean there's a variation in shallowness and depth so that when the waves come in and feel the bar, they break first in the shallow part. So the arch good wave is the point break. because it has a very distinct difference between shallowness and depth. A good sandbar will mimic a point break. Okay? This means that there's a very prominent part of the sand that is shallower than another part of the sand so that it can bend the swell. As that wave band is feeling the bottom, it's going to break first on the shallow part and stay open in the deep part. Without that variation in shallowness and depth, if the bottom is all uniform, the wave is just going to collapse and there's not going to be much to surf. So we surfers are looking for waves around the world with various different bottom topologies, rock bottoms, reef bottoms, sand bottoms, and combinations thereof that have these variations and that have a window open to enough fetch to create swell and receive swell, and that when that swell comes, the bottom is such that it can refract the swell bands so that we get this green part that we ride. You don't see green? You don't see rideable green? Probably not a rideable wave. Okay. Reef breaks. Rock reefs versus coral reefs. So in a way, that picture that we just looked at is also a reef break, a rock reef. It's a rock point. Another kind is a coral reef. I have an image for you here. Such as Tavarua. Okay, this is the little island atoll, a volcanic island, around which living coral breaks in this 360-degree pattern. And I will be honest, I haven't surfed a lot of these kind of atoll breaks myself. I've consumed a lot of surfing media because they create very mechanical, perfect waves if the swell direction is correct. What do I mean by that? Well, a swell coming from over here is not going to make these waves break as well as a swell coming from over here. So whichever way this faces, it's going to have a particular swell direction that it likes, that the bands, or maybe even from here, because we can see these bands coming in and then wrapping around. Just look at this image really quickly. I'm going to make sure that's muted. And we see the wave breaking in a left direction. The reef breaks, like the point breaks, the bottom is set. Okay, the coral is growing, the rocks are moving over time in way longer time span than any of us are going to be alive. But they're not moving like sand moves at a beach break. So at a beach break, a sandbar can exist and be destroyed overnight in the case of like one swell, whereas large chunks of reef are not going to change in that quick of a time. And they're mostly going to break the waves. They're going to break in one direction. You do not want to go right here. If you go right, you are going to be in a world of pain. You might be in a world of pain if you try to go left and you wipe out as well. There you see the reef underneath these waves because the coral is so beautiful, and it creates this beautiful tubing wave that you can ride inside and come out of. That's the goal for a lot of surfers. This is obviously super advanced surfing, but it's good to watch to see what's possible and to see why surfers seek out these kinds of bottoms that are set. Because if they get the swell from the correct direction, they're going to bend the wave bands around the reef. Those open energy swells are going to hit the shallow water all of a sudden and fold over. Last, for that part, I just want to talk really quickly about what an A-frame is. And here's the famous lower trestles. An A-frame wave, when we're talking about that, goes left and right. So left and right. I'll talk more about, wait, what are you talking about, Dion? That wave's going to my right. That wave's going to my left. Yes, but standing on the shore, you're not riding and catching the waves. So waves we're always describing as the direction we have to go as we're entering that wave. So I enter that one to my right. I enter that one to my left. All right, hope that makes sense. Again, A-frame, it looks like the letter A. An A-frame goes right and left. This happens to be breaking over cobblestones. There's a picture of the cobblestones right there. It's set. It does require a specific swell direction. So again, let's make this correlation. A wave that is not a sand bottom, all beaches, all surf breaks, the swell direction is very important, but it's more important for bottoms that don't move, rock and reef. Sandbars can be created based upon waves coming from like a similar swell direction. Say, for example, in Rockaway Beach, we only had a bunch of south swells. That might pile the sand up in one area and create a sandbar that reacts differently at different swell directions, but it accepts more swell directions. Whereas I will just be concrete here, Lower Trestles does not look like this on a north swell. It's kind of terrible. This comes from southwest swells or west-southwest. Cool little image here. Waves, the uppers and Cottons are more like point breaks. Churches is more like a right point break, where Lowers breaks in both directions. It's that famous A-frame. Okay, now we're going to talk about all of these things. And then we'll go through tides, and then this video will be over. We're already at 26 minutes. It's a long video. This stuff is very dynamic. You are not going to get it right away. You have to keep watching waves over and over and over again. And the video we're about to go through right now of just the empty waves, I'm going to have that available for you as well, just so you can put that on and stare at empty waves. But first, lefts, rights, closeouts. You need to know the difference. That needs to be crystal clear to you in your surfing practice. You should be able to look at any wave from the shore, from the water, from wherever, from above, and be like, that's a left, that's a right, that's a closeout. And you play that game, left, right, closeout, until you are correct about 99.999% of the time. Then you want to know the anatomy and features of the wave. The lip, the face, the power source or the curl or the pocket, shoulder, tubing, tubes, white water. Then you want to know the difference between mushy waves and steep waves or fast waves. So mushy and spilling equals slow, steep and plunging equals fast. I have definitions of that below. Let's look at this wave video. All right, this is Rhode Island. This is Point Judith. This is Narragansett, where we looked at that little bit of land. Big swell, Hurricane Sam, I think. You can see the little rocks in here. Move this over here. The waves are all going right. This is a right-hand point break with a rock bottom. Longboard surfer. It's a nice, slow, mushy wave. How do we tell it's mushy? Because it has this white bit, and it has what we would call a fat face or shoulder. The anatomy. The green is the face. The white is the white water. The area where the green and the white meet is the pocket or the curl or the power source. If you go too far out on the shoulder, you lose the power of the wave. So a lot of the maneuvers around surfing have to do with moving in and out of the power source of the wave. Surfer taking off, going right. This is an inside wave, or a medium insider. This is a wave that went unridden. Nobody saw this wave. We have this fellow on the outside wave and the guy that just surfed by us right here. The wave closes out in this section. New wave. This is a beach break. A right-hand breaking wave at a beach break. See it staying open over here. This wave does not have great shape. Another right-hand breaking wave at a beach break. I have a series of rights so that you can see this. This is a faster, steeper wave. This wave is more plunging because it has the lip line that is throwing out. This is a harder wave to surf than that mushy point break that we saw. This is the lip line. This is the pocket, power source, curl. This is a tube. It's a very fast tubing wave. You have to be able to get to your feet very fast to surf on a wave like this. And you have to understand that the wave is moving to the right. The goal is to be right there. And when you see a wave like this, you want to imagine yourself entering, looking to your right, and keeping your eyes high up on this lip line. Anybody that takes training with me, I'm going to emphasize this a million times. This is the lip line, and if you were taking off on this wave, if you were here, you need to be looking here. Eyes up and down the line all of the time. This is the line of the wave. The line is going right. Ended up closing out. Another right. This one is more open. This one is breaking into deeper water. This is in California. How can you tell the water is deeper? Because of how soft the shoulder is. So shallow here, deep here. That's why it stays open. Staying open means staying green. Another right. Beach break. Green wave, peeling in this direction. This wave is somewhere between spilling and plunging. Another right breaking wave. This one's kind of a wedgy A-frame. What do I mean by a wedge? I will wait for it. This is a wedge right here. So you have a right breaking wave going into a left breaking wave. And they're gonna like that. Right breaking wave in New Jersey. Right breaking wave in New York. Left breaking wave in Rhode Island. This is on the other side of the point break. Did not mean to do that. Okay. You see the rocks? See the wave going to the left. Ended up closing out. Right, this is a left breaking wave in New York. Small little wave, but tubing. Another one behind it. This wave is steep even though it's little, and it's very fast. Left breaking wave in New York. The peak is right here. Two terms that I think I'll have to add to that ditto are deep and on the shoulder. To be deep when you're taking off on a wave means to be closest to the part where the wave first starts breaking. So you have options of where to take off on this wave. You could take off way back here. You could take off way over here on the shoulder. It's always better to take off at the peak because you get the longer ride. Also, it is a misconception that it's harder. It's actually easier to take off at the peak because where the wave is steeper, you get into its energy easier. Okay, this has a nice feathering lip. If you took off deep on this one, you could probably get into a little tube. And that one stayed open, as we say. Another one behind it. The peak is right there where it breaks first. The goal is to take off here, and there is no other direction to surf on this wave. If you're checking the surf and you see waves breaking, again, this wave is left because it's going to the left. If you're taking off on the wave, you're looking left, keeping your eyes up the whole entire time. You don't let your gaze go here. There's nothing happening over here. When you look at that wave, it's all happening that way. You're not going to look that way either. Why? It's all white over there. There's no information for you. The wave you're surfing is either going to the left or going to the right. There are no other options. None. Every wave is a right or a left or a closeout, and if it's a closeout, don't go. There are specific cases where you do go on a closeout, but we can discuss that later. Another left in New York. Look at the shape. This is a wave that has what we call perfect shape, and this is a beach break, which means the sand is very good. It means that over here is deeper than over here. What do we mean about perfect shape? It has a taper. Look at how soft the lip line is over here. Tall here, going to small. That's how you tell a wave is going to stay open or peel. Again, our desire as surfers is to ride, and regardless of the board, boogie board, knee board, long board, short board, body surfing, the whole goal is to be on this green part of the wave, to figure out how to do that. The best way first is to understand A, that that's the case, and B, where you're supposed to look. Because just like driving, you're going to go the direction that you look. And so you always want to look up at this line and understand the wave as having a peak and having a shoulder and going to the left or going to the right. Ooh, what a wave. Here is a left reef break in Costa Rica. We notice the waves are similar. They're both going left. They're both staying open, but that wave had rocks underneath. Here is a mushy left breaking wave in Costa Rica. Different watercolor here. We notice that this wave is a little more welcoming than those waves that we saw in Rockaway. Soft, crumbly. Another left breaking wave in Costa Rica. Staying open, crumbling, perfect beginner kind of wave. And now we're into closeouts. The waves are all going to break at once, or they're going to look like a left or a right for a second. Oh, maybe I go left. Nope. Oh, maybe that's a left. Nope. All breaking at once. All breaking at once is a closeout. So we see Brian here. Oh, I think it's a right. I think it's a right. It kind of went right, but watch. Boom. Close out. Closeouts are tricky because, as in the case of this wave, this looks like a perfect left, right? Correct? But look what happens when it hits this inner part of the sand. It all comes down at once. Sometimes it's tricky. It's hard to know when a wave is a closeout, but if you see that line go up, and let's just go back to the Costa Rica ones. I think that, yeah, this is a good example right here. The way to tell a closeout is this line is all coming at once. You don't see that distinct taper. Sometimes it's very difficult to tell. I'm just going to say right now, I know it's very difficult to tell. And I've had examples of waves that go right for a little bit and then close out, and go left for a little bit and close out. But the really big difference is that a closeout, the line is all the same and just boom. Now, closeouts can happen because of the bathymetry. They can happen because the bottom doesn't have enough contour to bend the swell band, or the swell band is of a certain nature that the way that it reacts with that area of coast, whether it's a reef, a point, or a beach break, is that it's just going to close out anyway. Almost, like, if it doesn't close out, there's another saying we have called section off, which is when one section of the wave all slams down at once, and maybe it stays open down the line, but if you were to take off too deep, you wouldn't be able to make it around that section because it would close too fast and too far in front of you. So that is a kind of point break version of a closeout. Because if you have a point like the one at Raglan where it's just so open on the bay side that the wave for the most part peels perfectly, and those kind of waves you can get mile-long rides and such, it's less likely that any wave will close out, but it could section off on you. Whereas beach breaks, because the sand is always moving, they tend to have more closeouts, or to have certain set waves come through that the whole wave breaks at once. Similarly, reef breaks, not having such a strong curvature as the point breaks, can receive one band of swell or set of waves that is just the wrong direction, and it will close out. So be on the lookout for closeouts. It's a thing you want to look at every time you're checking the surf. You want to play the game left, right, closeout. And the goal is, when you're checking the surf, to be able to notice from the shore how many waves are staying open. This is to say nothing of how many of those you have to share with other people. But right now, what I want you to get from this is just a basic understanding of why waves break in one direction versus another, because of the fact that the waves are breaking due to how the shape of the bottom is, how it is curved, meeting with the curve of the wave, bending those waves so that one part of the wave stays open and the other part breaks. Last, tides. And I'm not going to go into intense detail here. I would love for you to read the book by Jonathan White called Tides, The Science and Spirit of the Ocean. I'll make sure there's a link to that book on this PDF. The tide itself is a wave. I've talked about this in other places. It's a wave caused by gravity. It is different in all of the world's little oceans, the basins in which the water is held. There's only one world ocean, but at the same time, each little sea or each little coastal area is its own micro basin, and it sloshes at a different pace than the others. Let's just say, for the sake of brevity, that there are high tides and there are low tides, and this is important for all the places that you surf, because that's going to determine how deep or shallow the water is. And you're going to need to know for your area whether that particular stretch of coastline prefers a high tide, a low tide, or a medium tide. An outgoing tide when the tide is going low, or an incoming tide when the tide is coming in. I can't tell that to you. I can tell you about my experience of different waves in the world. For example, the beaches that we surf in Costa Rica, near my property in southwest Costa Rica, they favor higher tides. The sandbars can get pretty good, and there is one beach break that will only tube at the low tide, but you have to deal with a lot of closeouts to get the tubes. Whereas at the higher tide, the water is enough over the sandbar that more waves peel at the higher tide. So for example, when we're doing surf retreats down there, we target high tides, we surf around the higher tides. Whereas here in Rockaway, the sand shifts so much that it's a day by day, week by week, month by month basis, whether it's better at low tide or high tide. Now, there are cases when it's always better at low tide, which is based upon your ability level. So for me, for example, if I want to get tubed and it's a big swell, it's more likely that I'm going to get in and out of the tubes at the lower tide because the water's going to be shallower, so the wave's going to plunge more. Whereas, as a rule of thumb, a higher tide might be better for beginners, if at all, because there's more water over the sand and the wave's going to spill. It's going to be mushier, fatter. The wave's going to be more full of water. Now, different reef breaks and point breaks, they're all different depending on how that basin they're in sloshes. So whether the area of the world that they are has very high tides or very low tides. For example, Hawaii doesn't have very extreme tides, although different breaks are better at different times of year depending on what kinds of tides. The other thing that we want to think about are the moon cycles. So the tides operate according to sun and moon gravity. And when those are lined up, the sun and the moon, and it's a full moon, for example, those are going to be really big tides. If the earth is here, the sun is here, and the moon is here, and their gravitational energy is working opposite to one another, and it's somewhere midway in the lunar cycle, those are going to be medium tides, moderate tides. Okay, so The thing about tides that I want you to get from this is just that they matter, and you should know what they're doing, and you should pay attention every time you surf to what the tide is doing. Get in tune with the tides in your area. How high are the highs? How low are the lows? If you're surfing a beach break, is the sand set up in such a way that it's better, again, and better for whom, right? You want to take your ability level always into account when you're talking about the best tide, the best swell, and even the best seafloor, right? Because for the most part, a beginning surfer wants more mushy spilling waves because they break more slowly. So you want to find the conditions and the kind of bottom contours that are going to produce a lot of mushy spilling waves, so you have more time to understand the wave, to get to the peak, to turn your board around, to go left or right as the wave suggests. Now, if you can only surf fast beach breaks, which is the case for a lot of people all over the world, because honestly, the majority of the places that people are surfing are beach breaks, they're harder, and you need to study more, and you need to take more time at beach breaks because the sand is variable, so the waves are going to be more variable. They're not going to break in the same place every single time, which means if you are surfing a beach break, you have to get really good at learning to move around and seeing the different spots on the beach that those waves are breaking. I hope that this helps. Remember to stay tuned always in the newsletters, which the URL has changed. It's now https://dion.subkit.com. And stay tuned for the next 2 sessions after this. I know this was a long one. Thanks for hanging in there. You're probably going to have a ton of questions. Make sure you watch the wave video over and over again. I'm going to provide a link to that. And hit all these links. Study this a little bit more in depth. Buy Waves and Beaches so you understand this stuff even more. And buy Tides by Jonathan White. Those 2 books are the ocean science, all the ocean science that you need as a surfer besides this course.